My name is Dan Turner. I'm Head of Programming and Outreach for the Georgetown County Library, and we welcome you to A Glorious Cause, South Carolina and the American Revolution, a public history initiative of the Georgetown County Library. All programs are free and open to the public, and they're distributed around all 5 of our of the Georgetown County Library's facilities. So we started at the main branch, Georgetown Library. We went to Waccamaw Library, and we're now here out in Andrews, 105 North Morgan Avenue in Andrews, South Carolina. We have our branch manager, Haley, wonderful out here. So we're enjoying our facilities at Andrews Library, and we hope you'll come join us because we have a couple more great programs here, as well as today's program. And we'll also be at Southern Library, Southern Georgetown Library tomorrow, and again on Wednesday here at Andrews, Thursdays at Southern Georgetown Library throughout May, and then we'll go to Carver's Bay Library in June. So A Glorious Cause is a grant-funded project, a Library Services and Technology Act grant from the Institute of Museum and Library Services made this possible, and it's administered by our friends at the South Carolina State Library. And we also want to say thanks to our community partners, especially Georgetown 250. They've been extremely helpful and supportive, and of course our friends of the Andrews Library out here with the Andrews Library. Our speaker today, Paige Sawyer, someone who needs no introduction, but he'll get a brief one today, just a snippet, because we could go on for a while. But in brief, he is a Georgetown County historian, a popular public humanities presenter. He is a multiple offender. We've had him back again and again to speak to our library patrons. He is, because he knows he knows a lot about a lot of things, to put it briefly, and one of those things is Francis Marion, one of the chief figures in Georgetown County history and in American history, South Carolina history, American history, and of course the history of the American Revolution, one of the key figures in turning the revolution the American way. But Paige, he is a key member of Georgetown 250. He is a 7th generation South Carolinian. His family has roots here stretching back to the mid-1700s. So, you know, when he talks about it, his people were there back in the day. They lived the history. They were here at the time. He's been all around South Carolina. He was born in Aiken, raised in Columbia and Charleston, but he's been around in Georgetown. He may not be a native, but he's been a local in Georgetown for over 50 years, 5 decades. Although when you see him, you can't imagine he's even 50 years old. He's full of life, and full of stories and full of histories. He hosts a Revolutionary War walking tour of Georgetown and serves as a guide for Lowcountry tours, boat tours through Winyah Bay to North Island. He also served his country during the Vietnam War, and he has done the honor, Georgetown County, the honor of serving as Veteran Services Officer. So we're thankful to have him in that role, and we're grateful to have Paige Sawyer once again sharing his expertise today and talking about another great Georgetonian, Francis Marion. So let's welcome in Paige Sawyer.
All right. Thank you, Dan.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, sir. Good morning, and I appreciate the opportunity to come and speak about Francis Marion. Hopefully when you leave here today, you're going to be involved a little bit more with South Carolina Revolutionary War history and Francis Marion. Dan said I am a Georgetonian or Georgetown historian. I want to clarify that. I am not an academic historian. I'm just an old Pluff Mud redneck who has had a passion for history since I was about that tall. Our great-grandmother, she was born in 1880. She lived with us off and on, and I was always attracted to her because of her age. And in 1880, I was into cowboys, gunslingers, and Indians, and I knew at that time in 1880 when she was born, Billy the Kid, Wyatt Earp, Doc Holliday, they were still out in the West having, I won't say having fun, but, giving us the legends of the Old West. And even though she was born in 1880, I always associated her being in New Mexico, Arizona, with the cowboys. But she got mad at me one day when I asked her about the Vikings, and she told me, Paige, I'm not that old. But that passion for history has grown from that time, and it continues to consume my body, my mind. I just want to learn more and more and more and share it with good people like y'all. Like Dan said, today we're going to talk about Francis Marion. And Francis Marion, just to give you a background, let's go ahead and start, see if I can get this thing to work. There you go. South Carolina is the battleground of freedom during the American Revolutionary War. Now, some people, like Dan said, people in Virginia and other states or other colonies at the time, they will disagree with you and say South Carolina. They contributed, but they weren't the battleground of freedom. South Carolina has 46 counties, and there were revolutionary skirmishes, events in 45 of those counties. So that gives you an idea of how widespread the Revolutionary War was in South Carolina. Now this graphic right here, battles per colony between 1775 and 1783, you can go down the list, and down at the bottom, you can see the keys 1775 to 79 are in blue, 1780 to 83 are in red, and the green signifies the battles, skirmishes, or events that Francis Marion was involved in. South Carolina has 3 lines, and all the other colonies have 1. So that gives you an idea of how involved South Carolina was during the American Revolutionary War. The license tag that you see on the cars, this came out this year, and you see the very top line where the Revolutionary War was won. Here again, people in Virginia, North Carolina, Massachusetts, New York, Delaware, Connecticut, they will all tell you their side of the story, that it wasn't won in South Carolina. It was won here in South Carolina because Cornwallis, he couldn't take us anymore. He made his way from South Carolina to North Carolina and surrendered in Virginia. But you take South Carolina out of the equation, and Cornwallis may not have surrendered. All right. Now, during the Revolutionary War, this is the British on your left side. You see they have green and red uniforms. On the right side, you see the Patriots, the rebels, the Whigs. Some are in uniform, some are not. You see some Indians. The Catawba Indians, they were allies of us fighting against the British. The Cherokee, they aligned themselves with the British. You see some black soldiers over here, slave and free blacks. They were fighting with us. We don't know who the gentleman is on the horse. You see some in uniforms, you see some in everyday garb. These were the people who supported the militia. Francis Marion, he was head of the militia. Now this is a hypothetical wanted poster, but in 1781, the most wanted man in South Carolina was Francis Marion. Wanted by the British, wanted by the Patriots. He was born in present-day Berkeley County, which is right next door to Georgetown County. Now, when he was born, he was either premature or awfully small, because as he grew, he had deformed knees and his ankles were bad. So he grew up sort of walking like that. Now, Francis Marion, when he was born, his family owned slaves. And Francis Marion was given 3 slaves. One was named Oscar, who was about 2 years older than Francis, and his parents, Buddy and Chloe. Now, Oscar, Francis, when he learned to talk, he called him Buddy because he was his best buddy. Francis and Buddy, they did everything together. They went hunting together, they went fishing together, they went out on a boat together. Whatever they did, they were just like that the whole time. So it was Francis and Buddy. Well, when Francis was about 4 years old, his family moved to Georgetown County. This is Buddy in his later years. I call him Buddy. His real name's Oscar, but Francis referred to him as Buddy, and I will too. When Francis was about 4 or 5 years, his family moved to Georgetown along with his brother Gabriel, his mother, his father, Oscar, and his family. Now, Lynn and I were just talking about our sons, how much they love fishing. Georgetown County has 5 rivers that flow through it. And guess what's on those rivers? Boats. Now, any little boy, when they look out on the river, a waterway, they see a boat, they're fascinated. Francis Marion was one of those little boys, and he loved the boats. He would go up to his mama and say, "Mama, when I get to be a big boy, I'm going to go on one of those boats." "Yes, Francis, I understand. You just keep your imagination going." Well, when he was about 16 years old, he got his chance to get on a boat. There was a boat going down to the West Indies, and they needed a crew of 6 people. So Francis, he was about 16, he said, "I'll go on that boat." So he and the crew got on the boat. They went to the West Indies. They delivered the cargo. And on the way back, guess what happened? This is a small boat, about 40 feet long. But on the way back, a whale surfaced, turned the boat over, flipped it over. Now, they didn't have time to grab water. They didn't have time to grab food, provisions, anything. They were just thrown into the water. A lifeboat came up, a little dinghy. They got into the boat, and there they were, adrift out in the West Indies, out in the Caribbean, in the hot sun. About 2 days later, the little dog, their pet that was on the boat, swam up to the dinghy. They pulled him on board, and unfortunately, they had to sacrifice the dog's life for them to have some nourishment, something to help them live. Well, 2 of the crew, they died from exposure. And Francis Marion and the other 3, they finally got back to land. Everybody was glad to see them. They thought they were gone. Francis Marion, he looks around the crowd. He finds his mama. He goes up to his mama. He gives her a big hug, and he says, "Mama, I will never get on another boat as long as I live." And that was a good thing, because Francis Marion, he got that marine life out of his body, out of his system, and he said, "I'll never get on another boat," and we're so thankful he did, because he became one of the greatest American Revolutionary War heroes in American history. Now, about 2 years after he came back, they were living in Georgetown, his father died. Now, his mother moved back to Berkeley County. Francis went with her. Francis's, one of his brothers, Gabriel, he married a young lady, and the young lady inherited a plantation from her parents as a wedding gift called Belle Isle. So Francis lived with his brother Gabriel and his wife until about 1759. Around that time, the Indians up in the northwest corner of South Carolina, up in Cherokee County, Oconee, Pickens, Spartanburg County, the Indians were attacking the settlers. And Francis, he joined the 2nd South Carolina Regiment, and he was sent up into the northwest corner to fight the Indians. I'm sorry, he didn't join the 2nd South Carolina Regiment at that time. He joined the British Army. The British, they were the ones fighting the Indians. Now, while he was up there, he noticed two things about the Indians that would make a good memory for him. He noticed the Indians, when they attacked the British, it was always at night, early in the morning, when the British were caught off guard. And the Indians, there were only 8 or 9, 10 of the Indians. They would attack, they would go in, whoop, 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 hollering, shooting their bows and arrows, and really surprising the British. And by the time the British figured out what was gone, the Indians had hightailed it, and they were back in the woods, hiding, weren't anywhere to be found. He also noticed that the British, after they were attacked by the Indians, their revenge would be on the Indian women, the Indian children, the Indian livestock, the Indian villages. They would attack the Indian braves, but then they would go after the ones that didn't have any defense, didn't have anything to do with it. They burned the crops. They killed the livestock. They just devastated the entire village as a rebuttal to the attack from the Indians. Francis Marion didn't like that. He said, you know, I can understand fighting our enemy, but I don't understand the disregard for their family, for the children, for the livestock, for the crops. So he went back to South Carolina after the Indian War, and he was a full-grown man at this time. When I say full-grown, he was 5 feet 2 inches tall and weighed 110 pounds. He was a little old boy. He had a big old hook nose. He had dark eyes. He had a high forehead. He walked with a limp. And if you passed him on the street, you'd say, bless his heart, he needs help. So he wasn't an imposing military figure like you would think a military hero would be. But he bought some property on the Santee River and gave it the name Pond Bluff. Now, I know this photograph was made many years after 1760 because you see a vehicle there. But that's what the place looked like after he built it, Pond Bluff on the Santee River. Now, he also joined the 2nd South Carolina Regiment at this time, he and his brother, and he also served in the South Carolina legislature. This is what the 2nd South Carolina Regiment uniforms looked like at that time. Now, in 1776, the British, they had been fighting Patriot forces up in the north, New York, Virginia, Massachusetts. And they said, well, we're not having too much success there, so why don't we go south and go take Savannah, take Charleston, move our way up South Carolina into North Carolina, and then meet our forces there in Virginia. And they thought there were a lot of loyalists in Georgia and South Carolina. Now keep in mind at that time, the civilian population, they were split as to their allegiance. If you hold your hand up, you've got 5 fingers, well, thumb and 4 fingers. But out of 5, 2 of those fingers, they were loyalists. They liked the king. They liked what was going on. The other 2 were patriots. They didn't want to have anything to do with the king. And then 1 out of 5, they were sort of neutral. So just everybody leave me alone. I just want to do what I want to do without your interference. So it was a civil war going on within the colonies. Now in 1776, the British, they had already taken Savannah. They didn't have any problems taking Savannah, so they said we're going to come in. I'm getting ahead of myself. I'm sorry. It was later when they went to Savannah. But in 1776, June 28, 1776, they said we're going to take Charleston. Now, Charleston was the wealthiest city in the colonies. They called it the London of the East. 9 of the 10 wealthiest people throughout the entire 13 colonies lived in Charleston. So the British wanted Charleston. So they said, we're going to attack it. They brought a fleet of ships down. They said, this is Isle of Palms, present-day Isle of Palms. They said, we're going to go by land. This is Fort Sullivan. It's now called Fort Moultrie. We'll send soldiers by land. They'll cross, when the tide goes out, they'll cross right here, get onto Sullivan's Island. We'll have the boats shelling Sullivan's Island, and we'll take it, no problem. Well, General Moultrie, he was in charge of Fort Sullivan. Fort Sullivan, after the war, or after the victory, Fort Sullivan, its name changed to Fort Moultrie. The Patriots defended the fort. Remember, this is the fort with palmetto logs and sand. Here you see the British ships attacking the palmetto fort. The only flag they had at that time was a blue, dark blue, indigo colored flag with a crescent right at the top. It got shot off of its staff. The Patriots, we didn't have much gunpowder, so they had to aim specifically. They couldn't just shoot randomly. They had to know their target and aim directly at that target. The flag got shot off of its staff. Sergeant Jasper, he rescued the flag, put it back up, and Sergeant Jasper, he went on to become a hero. It was just a few weeks later in August when the Continental Congress, they convened and issued the Declaration of Independence. They declared it on July 4th, but it wasn't signed until sometime in August. Now, after this battle, Francis Marion went back to Pond Bluff and became a farmer. He was raising tobacco, indigo, cotton, whatever he could grow and sell. And life was good for him. But then the British, this is when they came down and took Savannah and came in to Charleston, captured Charleston, and they said, we need to capture Georgetown. So in May of 1780, they sent a ship up from Charleston, up the coast, came into Georgetown. Captain John Artisoff, he got off the ship. He got off the ship right here at the foot of Broad Street. The River Room Restaurant is right here, if you know where I'm talking about. But there's a park right here, Francis Marion Park. He got off the ship there. He also sent armed barges up the rivers. Like I told you, Georgetown County has 5 rivers. All the plantations were on those rivers. They sent armed barges up there and told the people, the king, George II, is taking over your property. You are to become our property. If you have patriot family, patriot friends, you're either to turn them in or tell them to switch sides. Do you all understand me? I am here representing the king. He had a proclamation. This was the house that the British used as their headquarters. This house was located on the corner of Front and Broad, where present-day Rolling Local Restaurant is today. So it's right across the street from Francis Marion Park. The building didn't look like that. It looked like the one I just showed you. Well, we'll skip it. But anyway, that was on the corner of Front and Broad. Captain Artisoff, well, what are we doing here? You can go by the building today. There is a plaque on the side of the building, this site of British headquarters in the Revolutionary War, erected by the Georgetown chapter DAR in 1937. That's the proclamation. Now, word got around throughout the county that King George had taken over. And if you don't show your allegiance to the king, we might cut your head off, we might hang you. If you have family and friends and they're not showing their allegiance, you're going to report them to us. Do you understand? Yeah, a lot of people, nah, I don't know about that. Well, anyway, a gentleman by the name of John James, he lived in present-day Williamsburg County, Kingstree area. He lived out in Indiantown, if you know where Indiantown is. He was sort of the head of the militia for that area. And they said, Mr. James, we understand the people in Georgetown have been threatened by the king, and we need to know for sure, because we need to know if we're going to fight that, if we're going to have to live with it. So why don't we send you to Georgetown? You go and find out for sure what's going on. So John James, he dressed as a farmer, got on his horse, came into Georgetown, met Captain John Artisoff. They were on the second floor up in his office. And John James asked the captain, says, "Sir, is what I hear true?" The captain said, "Yes, it's true. If you have family, they don't show their allegiance, you're to turn them in. If you yourself don't show allegiance, we'll hang you." Well, John James, he didn't like that. He picked up a chair, whacked the you-know-what out of the captain, hightailed it out of the building, got on his horse, and got out of Georgetown as fast as he could back to Williamsburg District. Well, he got back, he told his family and friends what was going on. His group, he said, "This is what's going on, and it's serious. We either have to show our allegiance or we're going to fight." They said, "Let's fight." Well, John James says, if we're going to fight, we need a leader. And John James, he was friends with Francis Marion. He said, "I know just the person to get in touch with." Several days later, Francis Marion made his way to, they met at Witherspoon's Ferry. If you're leaving Johnsonville, going towards Florence, you cross over Lynch's River, right there by Weldon Industries. That was Witherspoon's Ferry at the time. That's where Francis Marion met the people from Williamsburg, and that's where they formed Marion's militia. Now, his militia, they were everyday people. Some were most of them were barefooted. Just about all of them had a horse. Just about all of them had a musket. They were black slaves. They were black free. Everyday people said, "We want to fight the king." Now, Francis Marion, he was also strict with his men. No mustaches, no facial hair, no long hair. He instilled discipline in them, but they respected him, even though he was only 5 feet 2 inches tall, walked like this. They respected him. They knew the great mind that he had. They didn't have any swords. They took all these long tree saws. You've seen tree saws about 6 feet long, got a person on this side, a person on the other side, and they're cutting down that tree. Well, they got those tree saws, took them to a blacksmith, and made swords out of them. Now, they lived in the woods. Either they lived in the woods next to a plantation, next to a farm. They didn't have a fortification. They didn't have barracks. They didn't have billets. They didn't have anything. They lived out in the open. Now, when they were ready to attack the British, now keep in mind at this same time, the British had outposts if this is a map of South Carolina, they had an outpost in Augusta, they had an outpost in 96, one in Camden, one in Cheraw, and then one in Georgetown. So they had a string of outposts around South Carolina. Now they needed to supply those outposts, and all the goods were coming into Charleston, so they would put them on a wagon train, take them to Augusta, 96, Camden, Cheraw, or Georgetown. Now Francis Marion's men, they attacked those wagon trains. And Francis Marion, he used the same lessons he learned when he was fighting the British. We're going to attack them at night. We're going to attack them when they're at their weakest. We're going to go in, we're going to hit and run, and then we're going to run. We're going to hide. So that's exactly what he did, what he learned from the Indians. By the time the British figured out what the devil just happened, you know, Francis Marion and his men, they were gone. Now, the area of operations for Francis Marion was from the Santee River to the PD River and upward towards Camden, the high hills of Santee. He did have some battles and skirmishes down in Moncks Corner, Berkeley County, in this area, but this was primarily his theater of operations right in here. And Georgetown's right there, right in the middle. Now, Francis Marion, he hid in the swamp. But I don't think you'll see any campgrounds located in swamps. They're up on high ground. Now, Francis Marion, how did he get the name the Swamp Fox? Well, like I told you, he hid in the swamps. And the British had a soldier named Bannister Tarleton. And he was instructed to go get Francis Marion, take him out. He's causing too many problems. He's causing trouble. Take him out. So Bannister Tarleton, he chased Francis Marion 26 miles, 7 hours. And Francis Marion was hiding in the swamp. And finally, with his horses tired, his men tired, he said, "Come on, boys, let's turn around. We're never going to catch this damned old fox." And that was how he got the name, the Swamp Fox, thanks to his enemy, Bannister Tarleton. That is Bannister Tarleton. Now, he was one mean person. He didn't mind burning your home. He didn't mind hanging you. He didn't mind killing your livestock. He treated you just like the British treated the Indians. He was the most hated man for the British Army. There were two, Tarleton and his other buddy, Colonel Weems. There he is chasing Francis Marion through the swamps. And you can see Oscar, or Buddy, right back there. Now, Oscar, when Francis Marion and his men were camped, and they were ranging in ages from 16 to 60, wide variety of ages. When they were camped and they were safe, Francis Marion always had sentries, pickets, guards, you know, in the outlying areas. But Buddy played the fiddle, and he could entertain the men playing the fiddle when it was safe to do so. And also, Francis Marion, he didn't tell anybody where the next skirmish was, when they were leaving, how long they were going to be here. But when they saw Buddy rolling up the bedroll, packing the stuff on the horse, his men figured out it's time to go, because Buddy knew. Buddy was the only one that Francis told what they were doing and where they were going. Now, I told you about Tarleton and Weems, two mean, bad people. They would go to the homes. I don't mean to use you all the time, but they would go to the home. Is your allegiance with the king? We're going to hang her. They would hang the man. A lot of times the woman, she would hide the man. He would hightail it off. The woman would say, "I don't know where he is." They would put a gun up to her throat. Many of the women did not give in. They said, "Shoot me, I don't know where he is. I don't know, you know, he left here 3 or 4 days ago." The women, they trusted Francis Marion. Excuse me. The women trusted Francis Marion because they knew Francis Marion was not going to put their husbands or fathers or brothers or sons in imminent danger. Francis Marion was very tactical with his attacks. He didn't do anything recklessly, and the ladies, the women, they trusted Francis Marion. Plus, Francis Marion, he didn't want to do anything dangerous to them because he knew they needed to go home, take care of the livestock, get the corn out of the field, do whatever they needed to do, and they would come back. They may be gone for 2 weeks, but if he treated them nicely and didn't put them in imminent danger, they would come back and help him fight the British. Indiantown Presbyterian Church, just over the Williamsburg County line. John James, a man who lived in this area, he's the one who went to Georgetown and found out exactly what was going on. Well, they were coming after him. So we're going after John James. Where does he go to church? Indiantown Presbyterian Church. Well, they burned it. They burned the church. Thankfully, no lives were lost. They didn't burn anybody in the church, but they burned the church. It was rebuilt in the early 1900s, and that's the way it looks today. John James, he's buried in the cemetery there at Indiantown Church. Once they burned the church, they went to his home. Mrs. James, she was there. Where's your husband? I don't know. They put her and the kids, children, in a room, kept them locked up for about 2 days, 3 days. They burned the home. Mrs. James and the children, they escaped. They were not injured, but they burned the home. So that's how brutal and mean, excuse me, they were. Now, you may have heard about the sweet potato dinner. We don't know if it's fact or fiction, but it's a good story to tell. Francis Marion and his men had a captive British soldier. And the British commander, they had a captured Patriot soldier. So word got around that the British soldier wanted to meet General Francis Marion and exchange prisoners. So they blindfolded the British soldier, took him to this camp, hidden out in the woods. They exchanged prisoners, and Francis Marion offered the British soldier, said, "Sir, would you like to stay and have supper with us?" The British soldier said, "I would be honored to have supper with you." He put a sweet potato on his plate. And the British soldier looked around, for something else to go with it. And he said, "Is this all you have?" And Francis Marion said, "Yes, but you can get 2. We have an extra supply tonight, so you can get 2. That British soldier thought right then, said, here are these men camping in the woods, eating sweet potatoes, nothing else, maybe a possum, squirrel, coon, raccoon, and that's it. And people who are that dedicated will never be defeated. Here again, I don't know if it's fact or fiction, but supposedly the British soldier went back and said, we will never defeat an enemy that is that dedicated. He resigned his commission and went back to England. There are many depictions of that sweet potato dinner. Now, a lot of people will tell you this is Oscar down here. To me, this is Oscar back here holding on to Francis Marion's horse, ready to skedaddle if they have to. There are many interpretations of this story. That's the same one, but in color. The person who painted this, John Blake White, he knew Francis Marion as a child. When John Blake White was a young boy, he knew Francis Marion. So he is the only painter that we know of that painted Francis Marion because he knew him. All the others are what they thought they knew. So look at that British soldier looking, that's all you got? Now the women, like I told you, they're keeping the home fires burning, taking care of the children, taking care of the livestock. Sometimes the British soldiers would break in, she'd grab her musket, get out of here. They would take her, burn the home, do whatever they needed to do to scare her. Adam Cusack, he ran a ferry across Lynch's, I think it's Lynch's, or Black Creek. I don't know if that's Black River, but Black Creek. He refused to take a group of British soldiers across the river. They said, well, we're going to hang you on the spot. His wife, children came out and pleaded, please don't hang my husband, their father. They hung him. Even a doctor, a local doctor, he was there at the same time. They said, please, don't harm this man. He's got a wife, he's got children. They burned the doctor's home for interfering. They went from Kingstree to Chirral, burning homes, burning plantations, killing livestock, devastating the entire area, a path 15 miles wide, all the way from Kingstree to Chirral, 70 miles in length. Here's Francis Marion at his camp. Now, like I told you, they didn't have anything to eat, mostly sweet potatoes, whatever they could grow, corn. If a farmer gave them a hog or a cow, you know, they would slaughter it, have some meat. Otherwise, it was a possum, squirrel, raccoon, whatever they could shoot and kill. Now, the rivers were very vital to moving Francis Marion and his men, horses, dogs, up and down the rivers. This painting was supposedly on the PD River here in Georgetown County. You can see Francis Marion right here, got a blanket wrapped around him. Here's Oscar right here. They couldn't get the horses on the barge, so, you know, they would tie them and they would swim with them. But that was their main way of traveling because of if you own the ferries and the river, if you had control of the ferries and the rivers, you had control of that area. So the rivers were very vital to Francis Marion. Now, Gabriel Marion, now this is not his brother. Gabriel had a son named Gabriel Jr. Right outside Georgetown on the Andrews Highway. Gabriel Marion was captured. They found out who he was, and they put a shotgun right to his chest and blew him up. 15 or 16 years old. When word got back to Francis Marion, he was upset, but he was, I don't mean happy, but he was happy, I don't want to say happy, he was elated that Gabriel Marion gave his life for the freedom of our country. Now, in June of 1780, well, I failed to tell you, in May of 1780, the British, well, they captured Charleston. They came up and captured Georgetown. They held Georgetown for 1 year. It was under British control from 1 year, 1780 to 1781. Well, they left in June of 1781, went back to Charleston, the British. But 2 months later, in August of 1781, they came back to Georgetown. They still had a grudge. And the ship fired cannonballs into Georgetown, caught the stores on Front Street on fire. They burned 42 homes in Georgetown. Now, can you imagine the devastation of 42 homes in a small town being burned, your business district being destroyed? And there's a marker telling you the same thing right there in Francis Marion Park. In August 1781, much of the town was burned during a raid by the British privateer Manson. Toward the end of the Revolution, Georgetown became a valuable supply port for the American Army in the South. It would take Georgetown 50 years, 1830, before it finally got back into the economic condition it was before the fire. Now, Cornwallis, Lord Cornwallis. Here again, the Revolutionary War was won in South Carolina, just like the license tag says. Cornwallis, he realized he was defeated. So he hightailed it from South Carolina into North Carolina. There was a battle at Guilford Courthouse. It was sort of a draw, but Cornwallis, he saw the writing on the wall. So he said, I'm going to Virginia, get away from the Carolinas, and he surrendered in Yorktown, Virginia. The war, even though it was over, the peace treaty wasn't signed for another year, but Francis Marion, he went back to Berkeley County to Pond Bluff, his home on the Santee River. Unfortunately, it was devastated. The patriots in that area, they used what they could, the chairs, the furniture. The British in that area at the time of the war, they burned what they could. They found out it was his home, so they destroyed it. He didn't have any money. What few slaves that were left on the Pond Bluff, they stayed loyal to him. He bought food, clothing on credit. He bought livestock on credit and reestablished his farm. He bought Buddy a new fiddle. There's Pond Bluff. Oscar Marion, Buddy, like I told you, he bought Buddy a new fiddle. Buddy was happy with that. Now, after the war, Francis Marion was elected again to the South Carolina State Senate. He was in the State Senate when the South Carolina Constitution was drawn up and signed. The South Carolina legislature, they gave him a gold coin for his devotion to South Carolina. They also offered him a job at Fort Johnson. Fort Johnson is on James Island, across the harbor from across Charleston Harbor. They offered him a job to have that rebuilt. First time he had gotten paid in, 5, 6 years. He was advertising for laborers. Daniel Cannon, Francis Marion, and A. Vandross, they were the commissioners. Like I told you, first time he had gotten paid in years. He also, his first cousin, Mary Vidot, she had had her eyes on Francis Marion since he was a little boy. She never married. Francis Marion never married. So at age 59, he married Mary Vidot. They were too old to have children. Here it is, Brigadier General Francis Marion, who served with great reputation in the late war, to Miss Mary Esther Vidot of St. John's Parish. They made their home at Pond Bluff. She was wealthy. She had saved money during the Revolutionary War. She also had a number of slaves that she brought into the family. So the plantation was back up and running at that time. Peter O'Ree, a native Georgetownian, he lived on Winyah Bay, where present-day Belle Isle is. He was one of Francis Marion's soldiers. Peter O'Ree, O'Ree County, where Myrtle Beach is named after Peter O'Ree. Peter O'Ree would visit Francis Marion and his wife, Mary Esther, at Pond Bluff. Peter O'Ree, Oscar, Mary Esther, and Francis, they would get a wagon and they would go and visit some of the old soldiers from the Revolutionary War. Oscar stood by Francis Marion the whole time. Some people say, why didn't Francis Marion free Oscar after the war? And there are two trains of thought on that. One is that had Francis Marion freed him, because of the laws at that time, Oscar would have had to have left the state. Oscar and his mother and father, even though they were slaves, they were more like family. They had grown up together. They were just close. So it wasn't a master-servant type relationship. It was a family relationship. Francis Marion and Mary Esther, they didn't have any children, but Francis Marion, he wanted to have an heir. So his grandnephew, who was named Francis Marion Dwight, he said, if you drop your last name Dwight, I will make you my heir. So they made Francis Marion his heir. Francis Marion got married, had all daughters, all girls. So didn't have any boys to pass it on. So there are no direct, if somebody tells you I'm a direct descendant of Francis Marion, that ain't happening. You might be a niece or a nephew, but you're not going to be a direct descendant. In 1794, Georgetown realized how much Francis Marion had done to help Georgetown. So in 1794, a group of citizens got together and compiled a declaration of appreciation. And they presented that to Francis Marion. He was grateful for their support. for their recognition, and he just thanked them profusely for recognizing him and what he did for Georgetown. Everybody's got to pass on, so on Thursday, 1795, Francis Marion, St. John's Parish, that worthy veteran, Francis Marion, who was a major of the 2nd South Carolina Regiment when the British were repulsed at the attack of Fort Moultrie. Sometime after he rose to the command of said regiment, soon after the fall of Charlestown, he was appointed a brigadier general in the militia of this state, in which something and services during the late war are well known to the citizens of this state. Mary Esther, she lived about 20 years after his death. She died, and there is her obituary. Now, the house they lived in at Pond Bluff, nobody was living there. Like all homes, when nobody's living there, it just falls in. Takes it, elements take their toll. But in 1893, the state of South Carolina said, hey, we've got a Revolutionary War hero. We need to recognize, we need to bring recognition to him, and we need to do it. So they got together. That was his tomb. A tree had fallen over the tomb, sort of crushed the top of it. They rebuilt it, cleared out the area around it. This is right where Belle Isle, the home of Gabriel Marion and his wife, where it was. Pond Bluff, Francis Marion's home, is under Lake Marion when they created Lake Marion and Lake Moultrie. There's a historical marker of the former home of Gabriel Marion, brother of General Francis Marion, and the latter is buried there in the family graveyard. You can go there today and see his tomb. It has this wrought iron fence around it. You can see the tomb of his wife. She's buried right next to him. Let's back up. Well, I thought there were some other slides in here. Francis Marion, that's a portrait of Francis Marion that hangs in the State House in Columbia. But Francis Marion, he was born the same year, 1732, as General George Washington. You all know we've got 50 states, and there next to George Washington, guess who is number 2 in having cities, counties named after him? Francis Marion. Francis Marion has 29 cities named after him, 17 counties, and all around here we got Francis Marion Forest right down the highway, Francis Marion University right up the highway, Francis Marion Hotel down in Charleston, opened in 1924. Francis Marion is the grandfather of irregular forces, special forces, recon. During World War II, there were 2 ships named after Francis Marion. There was a helicopter unit in Vietnam named after Francis Marion, or the Swamp Fox. The 196 Fighter Wing, home of the Swamp Fox, at McEntire Air Force Base right outside Columbia. In 1959, Walt Disney, he was creating the series Francis Marion the Swamp Fox. And he sent people up to Georgetown County to see if this area could possibly be filmed for that series. And I don't have this from a good source, so I can't verify it, but from what I understand, they X'd out Georgetown County because they were afraid Francis Marion would find some British soldiers at the Sunset Lodge. No, they didn't choose Georgetown. The series, now here again, the series, it was all fictional, but it introduced people to a Revolutionary War hero. Francis Marion was 5'2". The person who played Francis Marion in the TV series was 6'1". This was Oscar. I can't remember the actor's name. But it was Walt Disney, very smart man, said we can make some money off of the Francis Marion, the Swamp Fox. So there were coloring books, there were comic books, there were records. Y'all remember the song, Swamp Fox, hiding in the glen, he fights again, or he fights again to run again, or something. There was a board game, Francis Marion. More comic books. Here again, they may be a little hokey, but they were introducing people to South Carolina history. For 50 cents and 2 bottle caps from a Canada Dry ginger ale, you could order a replica pistol. In 1982, the U.S. Postal Service said, hey, let's issue a stamp for Francis Marion. Well, they didn't issue a stamp, but they issued a series of postcards. And each one has a little brief history on it. In 2000, the movie The Patriot came out. What's the guy's name who starred in it?
Mel Gibson.
Who?
Gibson.
I'm sorry.
Mel Gibson?
Yeah, Mel Gibson. Supposedly, Mel Gibson, the hero, his character was based on Francis Marion, Thomas Sumter, and Andrew Pickens. But it more they illustrated it more towards Francis Marion. Now, Francis Marion was not a gung-ho fighter like Mel Gibson was, but there again, it's introducing people to history. The entire film was filmed in South Carolina. Part of it was filmed in Georgetown County at Mansfield Plantation. The house that burned was a Hollywood set at Mansfield Plantation, and they used it as just the front facade, but they used it for the film, and that was a house that burned on Mansfield. And the night they burned it, there were fire trucks all around, EMS, everybody was out there just in case something happened. Thankfully, nothing happened. Every year, on February 27th, Francis Marion died on February 28th, 1795, but every year on February 27th, there is a commemoration at his gravesite for him. I've been several times. There are wreaths there. Those are some of the people who come, put up the wreaths. They bring a cannon, they fire a cannon, they'll have a speaker. They'll have a flyover from 2 F-16s from the Swamp Fox squadron out of McIntyre. There it is, Fighter Wing Squadron. Now here in Georgetown County, we've been celebrating the 250th anniversary of the Revolutionary War. This year is the big one. It's going to continue through 2032. In Georgetown, we have the Francis Marion Interpretive Center, which opened last year. It's in the Georgetown County Museum building at 120 Broad Street. There's a big mural of Francis Marion and Oscar on the side. That's what the front of the building looks like. On the inside, this is the only Francis Marion Interpretive Center in the state. So if you have not visited, we would suggest you visit, learn more about Francis Marion, bring your family, bring your friends, share the information, share the history, and spread the word. Also, we give walking tours, Old Georgetown walking tours, following the footsteps of Francis Marion. We will show you where the family lived, some of the homes that were occupied by the British. Oscar, whatever happened to Oscar Marion? Well, in 1996, Oscar Marion was recognized by President George Bush with a proclamation awarding him American Patriot status. And there was a ceremony in Washington in the hall. I can't remember the name of the hall, but he was recognized for being an American patriot. Join the fight to save our history. If we don't spread the word, if we don't show people, if we don't introduce history to the younger children, younger people, it'll be history just like it's history to us. But at least we need to spread the word, educate the people, educate children, families, adults, whoever, but let's introduce them to history and keep our history alive so that Francis Marion's name will never die. Any questions? All right, well, I appreciate all of y'all being here today. We thank you. And anytime we can talk about history or Francis Marion, let us know. Give me a call. I'll be glad to talk to you anytime. Thank you, Dan.